Hey everybody, don't get excited. I just want to share this very short clip of Sheikh Hamza Yusuf because what he's speaking about here is directly relevant to the topic and the theme of this video. So don't touch that mouse. I'll join you in a minute and a half.
I want to talk about critical editions because we have a crisis in the Islamic world, and that is that our books are being published now in unprecedented numbers. We've never had so many publications of books in the history of Islam, but it's being done at a time when we don't have the itqan of the community. So traditionally, if you look at the old, what they call the Bulaqiyya publications, or the Fez Hajariya that were done in Morocco, these were done with such itqan. And so you rarely find mistakes in them because they were done by ulama. If you look, for instance, Sheikh Muhammad al-Yaqubi, mashallah, he recently did a new edition of the Istanbul's, the famous Sultan Abdul Hamid's edition of the al-Bukhari, which is the best edition that you can do. So this was what was done. But now if you get books on hadith, they're filled with errors. So because people are doing it purely for money, and then a lot of the what are called muhaqqiqun, these are the editors. I mean, technically they're more than muhaqqiqun. A muhaqqiq traditionally is not an editor. It's somebody who verifies. It's a master. So you have the muhaqqiq, and then you have the mudaqqiq, which is even a higher maqam in the traditional terminology. So the muhaqqiq would find one proof for something, the mudaqqiq would find two proofs or more. Because a muhaqqiq should know when something's off, especially if you want to translate. We have people translating that aren't qualified to translate. It's a huge problem.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to be responding to a video by Rob Christian, which is called Allah Insults Muslim Women in Jannah. In that video, Rob Christian uploads or re-uploads a video by a Coptic Christian who argues that according to the Qur'an, Surah Waqi, chapter 56, verse 37, Allah will translate or transform Muslim women into prostitutes in heaven. In the Qur'an, in chapter 56, verse 37, Allah describes the Huris, the virgin maidens of paradise, as Uruban, which means playful and loving. The Coptic Christian in this video, and by extension Rob Christian, say no, all of the Islamic scholars are wrong. Urub doesn't mean playful and loving, rather it means prostitute or whore. Let's watch this quick 2-minute clip from the video.
نخش بقى على تفسير نص قرآني جميل جدا بقى في كتاب شقائق. احنا نكبر كده. شقائق الأترج في رقائق الغنج للإمام الحافظ جلال الدين السيوطي، تحقيق وتعليق الدكتور محمد سيد رفاعي، طبع دار الكتاب العربي دمشق. في صفحة 69 بيقول يا جماعة، أنا متردد والله، معلش بقى سامحوني بقى. في صفحة 69 بيقول إيه؟ 69 بيقول إيه؟ قال تعالى في صفة نساء أهل الجنة: إنا أنشأناهن إنشاء فجعلناهن أبكارا عربا أترابا. الواقع 35-37. بصوا بيقول إيه بقى؟ الكلام مش هتلاقوا على مواقع. خدوا بقى الزبد بقى. أطبق المفسرون وأهل اللغة. شوف ما يجيش واحد مسلم يتمضرط يقول لك أهل اللغة، المفسرون وأهل اللغة، على أطبق المفسرون أهل اللغة على أن العرب جمع عربة أو عربة أو عروب، وإنها القاعدة. أنا آسف في اللفظ يعني، مكتوبة كده في الكتاب.
And Rob Christian adds in a bit of his own commentary at the end.
Now I want to ask any Muslim woman, do you accept that about yourself? Do you have any honor, self-respect, or dignity to accept that about you, to be called a whore, a prostitute in the Jannah of Allah? Please wake up.
Okay, let's look at the book that was referred to in this video in a bit more detail. The book is called Shaqāʻiq al-Utrunj fi Raqāʻiq al-Ghunj, and it was written by Imam Jalaluddin al-Suyuti. This Arabic title is translated into English by Professor Rodica Fioranescu as The Citrin's Sisters, on women of sensitive coquetry, which doesn't help us very much. So perhaps today that could be translated as tangy women or spicy women, a handbook on how to be more sensual, or a handbook on how to be lovingly playful. So this was basically a short sex manual written by Jalaluddin al-Suyuti for the purpose of Muslim married couples. So anyways, this particular version or edition was printed in Damascus, and the editor was Dr. Muhammad Sayyid al-Rifa'i. The page in question was page 69. And here you can see where the discussion on the word urub begins. And as-Suyuti writes, أطبق المفسرون وأهل اللغة على أن عرب جمع عربة أو عروب أنها القحبة. So this here is the word for prostitute or whore, al-qahba. So according to this print edition, Suyuti is saying that the word urub, which occurs in the Qur'an Chapter 56 verse 37, means al-qahba or prostitute. This edition, printed in Damascus, edited by Dr. Muhammad Sayyid al-Rifa'i, might be the only print edition that contains this error, that contains this word qahba, prostitute. Another modern printing of this book, also printed in Damascus and edited by Adil al-Amil, published in 1994 by Darul Ma'arifa, does not contain this word qahba. Instead, it has the word ghanija, which means loving or playful. In this edition, edited by Adil al-Amil, it is page 26 that we have to look at. And here we can see that it's the same line we read before, but with a different ending. So now the relevant sentence reads, quote, the Mufassirun and the linguists all agree that urub means ghanija, unquote. And ghanija means coquettish, playful, romantically playful, sensuous, loving, etc. What it never means, however, is prostitute or whore. It was also brought to my attention by some brothers that there are other print editions of this same book by al-Suyuti which are printed in Cairo, and those print editions again do not have this word qahba, rather they have the word ghanija, meaning playful or loving. So how will we explain the strange and anomalous appearance of this word qahba in this print edition that the Christian Coptic is quoting in the video? Well, it could be due to the editor's mistake, due to the publisher's mistake. It could be due to the fact that the editor was using a single faulty manuscript of this book from which he was working, which could have been the result of a simple copyist error by a scribe. There's definitely very old manuscripts of as-Suyuti's book which contain the word ghanija, meaning loving or playful. I'd like to thank the kind brothers who provided me with this image of a very old manuscript of as-Suyuti's book, which is under discussion. In this manuscript, you'll be able to see that the word is ghanija, not qahba. This is why it's very important for editors and publishers of very old books to carefully examine and compare the manuscripts of that book. When I asked a professor of Arabic at a Canadian university about the appearance of this word qahba in the edition edited by Dr. Muhammad Sayyid al-Rifa'i, she said, this is a very good example of how harmful a bad edition can be. An ambitious editor could at least find a couple of manuscripts and compare before they print a book. But as this is a sensational topic, they obviously did not care. Fortunately, and we can thank Rob Christian for this, some very diligent Arab brothers have gotten in touch with the relevant publisher in Damascus and brought this error to their attention so that it can be corrected in future reprints. Now, in addition to the evidence of other modern print editions of this book and old manuscripts of this book that contain the word ghanija, not qahba, there are other common sense reasons to believe that ghanija is the correct and the original and accurate reading. Let's begin by looking at the title of the book itself. The title of the book is Shaqāʻiq al-Utrunj fi Raqāʻiq al-Ghunj. The word Ghunj means coquetry or flirting or loving play or romantic play. And the word ghanija, which we saw in that old manuscript and in the edition printed by Darul Ma'arifa, is a derivative of that word ghunj. It kind of makes sense that the book would be talking about the title of the book, right? Since that's the topic of the book. The topic of the book is flirtatious play, or, how to use your feminine charms in flirtatious play, in sensuous play with your husband. The title of the book is not How to Be a Prostitute. Here you can visually appreciate how the two words are related. In Arabic, both ghunj and ghanija share the same three root letters, ghain, noon, and jim. Another point is that we can understand how ghanija could have been misread or wrongly vocalized when we look at the consonantal skeleton of these two words, ghanija and qahba. In Arabic, the consonantal structures of the two words look very, very similar. Without the dots and diacritical marks, one can see how the mistake could occur. I understand that this was a popular book at the time, but still, I don't imagine people were memorizing it and reciting it. So here I am adding in the dots, and now you can see that the above word has become qahba, meaning prostitute, whereas the lower one has been made into ghanija, coquettish, loving, and playful. Again, without the dots, this is very easy to confuse. So how did that print edition end up with the word qahba when the original word was ghanija? You can visually see there how that could happen. If all of this evidence is not enough to show you that the original word was ghanija, not qahba, then let's add to that and let's consider some of the internal evidence within al-Suyuti's book itself. You'll recall that the Christian fellow in Rob Christian's video began his referencing of Suyuti's book on page 69. But let's read a bit further to see the context. This might help us to better assess which word, prostitute or playful, better fits the context of Suyuti's subsequent writing. If al-Suyuti was claiming that there's a consensus that the word urub means a prostitute, surely he would quote at least a handful of scholars to make his point. Well, let's read on. As we scroll down, on the top of the very next page, page 70, we see that Suyuti writes that according to the people of Medina, urub means shakila, which means pretty, beautiful, or well-proportioned. It does not, according to them, mean a prostitute. But we don't have anything very clear yet, so let's move further down. On the top of page 71, Suyuti says that according to the people of Iraq, urub means ghanija. So there we have that very same exact word, ghanija, meaning loving, playful, coquettish. On page 72, Suyuti quotes a scholar as saying that according to the people of Mecca, urub means a shakila, meaning a pretty girl. And according to the people of Medina, it means a maghnuja, which is a derivative of the word ghanija. It shares the same three-letter roots of ghain, noon, and jim, and therefore carries the same meaning of playful and loving. On page 73, yet another scholar is quoted to say that the meaning of urub in the Qur'an is maghnujat, which is the plural of maghnuja. So again, playful and loving girls, coquettish girls, not whores or prostitutes. On page 74, Suyuti says that Ibn Abbas understood urub as ghanija, again, playful and loving. On page 75, again, we see ghanijat, the plural form of ghanija, loving and playful, not whore, not prostitute. On page 75, urub is defined as either beautiful behavior or deference or a woman pleasing her husband. The point is, there's nothing about prostitutes or whores anywhere. On page 76, there's a riwayah that Ibn Abbas said that urub means awashiq, meaning intensely loving or devotedly loving. Urdu and Hindi speakers will recognize this word ishq as well too. Ishq ho gaya ya. Ashiq, one who is intensely loving, intensely in love. So awashiq is the plural. Everyone wants their spouse to be their ashiq. No one wants their spouse to be a whore or a prostitute. Then we scroll down to page 77, where Ibn Abbas is also reported to have described urub as flatterers or pleasers of their husbands. They flatter, they adulate, they please their husbands. On page 78, urub is explained as sensuous. On page 79, urub is defined as the she-camel that desires the male camel, or the way a mare desires a stallion. On the same page, urub is defined as the female who sexually desires her husband. Again, there's a lot about female sensuality and desire and love for her husband, but there's absolutely nothing, zilch, about prostitution. On the same page, it mentions women desiring their husbands very intensely, and women who are very intensely in love and devotedly in love with their husbands. On page 80, intensely in love with their husbands, you know, the very opposite of a whore or a prostitute. And again, and again, and again. Basically the same thing about loving their husbands. My aim here is to make sure that the fair-minded people, even from the opposite side, even from the anti-Islam side, even they should be convinced when they see this evidence. I mean, there were literally a dozen pages after page 69 that continuously demonstrated that the word urub or uraba means loving, playful, dedicated, coquettish, loving of the husband, desirous of the husband, but no mention of being a whore or a prostitute. Now, perhaps the problem might lie in the fact that for many Christian men, especially traditionally, a woman expressing and using her sexuality and her sensuality, even if directed towards her husband, is the same thing as a whore. But this is not the case in Islam, and this is not how Islamic scholars looked at female sexuality. I mean, here you have a handbook on sex which is oriented towards women, and it's written in the 14th century, maybe the 15th century of the Common Era. So in Islam, she can be very sexually desirous, she can have a very healthy sexual appetite, and that sexuality can be translated into morally good activity if that energy is devoted towards her husband. We're all the way down to page 81 now, and again, very intensely in love and devoted to their husbands. 4 times on this page, the same idea. Here's that word again, ghanijat, the plural of ghanija, meaning playful, coquettish, and loving. And at this point, it's simply done. The discussion is over, and Imam Suyuti moves on to another topic. He can't spend the entire book discussing the meaning of one word. He figures we've got the point by now. Now, I want you to think about this question. Why would Suyuti begin this section by saying that there's a scholarly consensus that urab means a prostitute, and then follow that by writing a dozen pages referencing scholars who defined urab as anything but a prostitute, rather as loving, desiring her husband, coquettish, playful, intensely loving towards the husband? That doesn't add up at all. However, if we understand that the original word was not prostitute, but it was rather ghanija, it was playful and loving, then everything makes sense and fits together perfectly. And that looks just about right in the Arabic as well, because it means that Suyuti started this discussion by stating that scholars agree that the word uraba means ghanija, and then he follows that up by quoting a whole bunch of scholars who use the exact same word or a derivative of that word. So we have him quoting scholars who use the word ghanija, ghanijat, maghnuja, maghnujat, etc. Now at this point, we could do this whole process all over again with Ad-Durr al-Manthur, which is a work of tafsir or Quranic commentary, also written by Imam al-Suyuti. We could go to Ad-Durr al-Manthur and go to Imam Suyuti's commentary on chapter 56, verse 37 of the Quran and see his discussion on the word urab, and it would be the exact same thing. Just replay the last 10 minutes of the video, and that's exactly what it would be. We would again see Imam Suyuti discussing the word urab as ghanija, ghanijat, maghnuja, maghnujat, and other synonyms that mean similar things. We would find no mention of whore or prostitute in that work. I'm going to spare you that because again, it would just be a repeat of everything that I've highlighted already. But we can have a quick glance at Tafsir al-Jalalain, which Imam Suyuti co-authored along with his teacher in English translation at altafsir.com. And we will see that the meaning of urab is given as enamored of her spouse. In other words, again, very in love with her spouse, intensely in love with her husband, etc. Finally, brothers and sisters, let us remember these words of the Holy Quran. لا يأتيه الباطل من بين يديه ولا من خلفه تنزيل من حكيم حميد. Falsehood cannot approach the Quran, not in front of it, nor from behind it. In this is an indication that anytime you have a question about the Quran, one of the things that you can do is read the preceding verses and read the subsequent verses, and in many instances that will clarify any possible confusion that might exist. The allegation that was made by the Christians was against the word urab in chapter 56 verse 37 of the Quran, and the erroneous and in fact outlandish proposal that was made was that verse 37 is describing the women in heaven as whores. But what does the very previous verse say? Verse 36 says that Allah will make them virgins. So here again, the Quranic context does not fit and the two simply do not add up. If, however, we go with all accepted English translations of the Quran, it all makes sense and fits together perfectly. God will make them virgins, loving and playful, and of equal age. Now that makes sense. This is probably why all published translations of the Quran in English translate the word urub in chapter 56, verse 37 as loving, playful, or some other synonym. I'd like to acknowledge the website islamawakened.com for their wonderful work in organizing and categorizing the various English translations of the Quran. On that site, we can see the most popular and accepted translations, and they translate urub as full of love, lovers, beloved, loving, perfectly created, loving companions, loving, full of love, easy to get along with, loving their husbands only, amorous, beloved, tender, chastely amorous, eloquent, loving, devoted to their husbands, perfect, loving, passionate, loving, etc. Then the less popular translations say the same thing, basically loving and devoted. You have non-Muslim and Orientalist translations of the Quran which say the same thing. N.J. Dawood, that was a Jewish translator of the Quran. And then there's unrecognized or partial translations of the Quran. And here too, there's no serious variance. We don't see any of these people suggesting the idea that it says prostitute or whore in the Qur'an chapter 56 verse 37. On a side note, but a related side note, this passage is most likely talking about the huris, which are a special category of creation, a special category of creatures that God places in heaven. So this verse is not even talking about Muslim believing women from this world. This verse is not talking about what believing Muslim women from this world will be translated into or transfigured into when they enter heaven. Therefore, Rob Christian's contention that Allah is calling Muslim women prostitutes and whores is fallacious from every single aspect that you examine it, from every single angle that you look at it. And on top of that, it's pretty crude and it's pretty perverted. And it betrays the dark obsession with sex that many anti-Islam Christian missionaries have and which they then project onto Islam and Muslims. And with that, inshallah, we have put another argument to rest with no chance of resurrection. Brothers and sisters, show some love by sharing the video. Christian friends, I know there's good, decent people amongst you. Help us to spread the truth, to remove such misconceptions which arise ultimately only out of hate, prejudice, and cheap polemics. May peace be on you all. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.